Hello everyone! In today's video, I'm going to be testing two different brush markers to see which ones last longer. A lot of times people want to know which brush pens last the longest, and that's such a hard question to answer because not all brush pens in my stash are used equally. So I might have had a few brush pens that I've had for years, but I haven't really used them very often, so that doesn't necessarily mean that they would hold up to a couple of years of use. So for this test, I attempted to just color with one of each of these types of markers until they dried out and became pretty much unusable. One disclaimer that I want to say is that neither of these brush pens are brand new brush pens. This would be a fun test to do if you could grab brush markers straight from the maker and know that they were both brand new and never used. But that seems like it would be pretty hard to do. I know a lot of us are trying not to shop too much right now, and even if I bought new markers, I don't really know that they weren't just sitting in a warehouse for a while. So what I decided to do is just use a marker from each set that isn't super old, and then I tried to choose colors that I didn't think I would have used very often. The body of the Tombow brush pen does look pretty new, and I don't letter with brown very often, so I thought that was a safe bet for the Karin Brushmarker Pro. So it's definitely not perfect, but I think it should be a decently fair comparison. So if you're ready to see which one lasts longer, let's get right into the video. I actually saw another video try this first, and then I realized there are several out there like this. I'm not sure who did it first, but I will link some of those below if you want to check out some other videos that test brush pens or markers this way. I started with the Tombow Dual Brush Pen and just started drawing line by line. So I wanted to point out that there seems to be a lot of white in here, but it seems like it's just because the tip of the brush pen isn't really drawing the same. So I don't want to keep going over the area that's lighter because I don't want to be going over the same spots 2 times and then wear the pen down more than is fair, if that kind of makes sense. There is some overlap in some of the lines because this is just really hard to do, but I hope that it kind of evens out. So this is the point where I'm wondering how people did 10 pages with this. Because I was kind of feeling like this brush tip is getting quite dry. It almost looks like the end of it is dried out, and you can see the color difference here. So at this point I figured we'll see how it goes. But then look, I took that short minute or so to talk about what was going on, and when I went back to writing with it, it almost looks like it's coming back. So this is why I didn't want to take a break once I started. So my point in testing out this pen with hand lettering the word hi is because no, the brush marker isn't technically dried out right here, but when it comes to hand lettering, this does appear to be pretty unusable. I can't imagine ever using a pen this dry or with a tip this soft and being able to create nice hand lettering with it. So while I'm still coloring with it, I probably wouldn't grab for this pen for hand lettering at this point. If I had to guess, I would go back to maybe page 3 or 4 and say that's probably around the point where it would have gotten really hard to letter with. Of course, I didn't actually test hand lettering with it that early on, so I can't be sure, but I do think that if you have these markers, you could probably make a pretty good guess of at what point you no longer feel good lettering with this brush pen, just kind of based off of seeing what it's writing like on these pages. And that actually would probably feel different for different people depending on your preferences and lettering style, because some people like softer pens than others, and so some of you might feel comfortable using this a little bit longer than others. It just kind of depends on how you feel about that. So I am going to keep doing this for the sake of the experiment, but at this point, I feel that I'm not really going to be able to use the brush pen for hand lettering. The brush tip is just too soft. However, I am doing a voiceover and I kind of know how this ends, so my opinion might change a little bit, but I'm trying to give you my updates of what I was feeling when I was filming this. So yeah, at this point I was just kind of feeling like it wouldn't be very usable. And I was obviously feeling this way because I wrote unusable in my practice hand lettering, so I just wasn't feeling very confident at this point. At this point, the tip is not even really writing anymore. It's just that part that I'm pushing really hard down on that's getting some color out onto the page. So I am pushing pretty hard to get this color. And here when I don't push that hard, not much comes out. At this point, my hand was tired and I had a feeling that this was probably going to be my last page. Now, when I was pushing a little bit harder here, I was able to get a slightly darker line, but I was just trying to push it a normal amount because I don't think many people are going to be carving the brush pen down onto the page just to get some color out. So to me, this feels a little bit more realistic. And this appears to be about the end of the brush pen. Unless I push really hard, it's just barely coming out. So it does appear that this brush pen did write for about 11 pages. Let me know in the comments below if you thought this brush pen would last this long. I know I could just end this video here, but I really like to do comparisons, so I wanted to test it out against another pen that seems like it would probably have a long life. So I decided to do the same thing with the Karin Brushmarker Pro. So at this point I went to start another page and I felt like all of a sudden the brush pen just kind of came back. I felt like the tip was still holding up really well, so to me it doesn't look all that bad. Right here, one thing that I was noticing is that the tip of the brush pen looked really orange, which I thought meant that there wasn't really any ink left in there anymore. So what I was trying to do here is test out a theory that maybe there wasn't really a lot of ink left, but it kind of felt like when I stopped writing to flip from one page to the next, that the brush tip maybe was filling back up with ink. So I decided that when I was done with this page, I was going to quickly try and brighten my camera and see if that orange colored tip goes away and kind of fills back up with ink. Because right here, that tip does look pretty orange, which again seems like it's drying out. But when I start a new page, it doesn't feel that bad. So I'm trying to do this fast, but you see how the tip is kind of orange, but then with a little bit of movement and time, the tip does seem to fill back in with color. So this brush pen is kind of fun that you can see the color right there on the inside of the pen. So I can see that we have more color inside and that we should be able to use it a bit more, but it's just a matter of time to see how long it lasts. And now for the test, it looks totally good again. So now I am on page 5 and I decided to just see if this brush marker would still letter, because remember the other one I mentioned how it was still coloring but that the brush was so soft that it was hard to letter with. But here the lettering doesn't really look all that bad. It might feel soft, but it definitely is not unusable in my opinion. So we are on to page 6 here, and this is really interesting because while the color is not lasting as long, I think at this point of the Tombow, the brush tip would have been pretty hard to use. But for this one, you can see that the barrel is empty, but I just lettered with it a bit ago and it still felt pretty good. I mean, it's frayed for sure. It's not like in excellent shape or anything, so don't think that I'm saying it's just as good as new, but it's not as bad as you might expect at the end of all of this. So first I will show you the side-by-side comparisons of each page, but I also wanted to test these brush pens out using some liquid watercolor to see if the brush tip was still pretty good if I added some color back to them, so I thought that it would be easy to just dip the brush tip in liquid watercolor and see what happened. So just a reminder, the Tombow is the red paper on the left and the Karin Brushmarker Pro is the brown paper on the right. Starting with page 1, it looks like the Tombow may be a little bit more saturated with color because it's kind of curled up so much compared to the other page. I mean, I could be wrong. That just seems like it would make sense if one got a little bit more saturated, that it would curl a little bit more, but let me know if I'm wrong. But it does look like the Tombow even started out more of a solid saturated color. Page 2, they're both still really solid looking in my opinion. Page 3, again, still pretty solid. Page number 4, we are getting a little more sparse here on the Tombow side, but I think this is probably because that tip part of the pen wasn't working as well. So I noticed sometimes when I was pushing down, the more thick part of the brush tip was dropping down color, but the tip wasn't. So this may be starting to show where the tip of the brush pen is wearing down. I can't be sure that's why, but if I had to guess, I would guess that's why it's showing a bit more streaking on the left-hand side. And then on page 5, you can really see it on the Tombow side. But on the Karin side, it's still looking pretty solid. And this is where I was testing out some hand lettering and felt like the brush tip wasn't all that bad. I know that it would have been really neat to see a lettering comparison with both at this point, but even looking at the streakiness of the Tombow side, you can kind of see how this might look when you're lettering. I know everyone is different, but if my brush pen is writing that streaky, I'm probably just going to toss it or try to use it for something else. But again, everybody has different styles, so that might not be the same case for you. I can also see still here on page 5 that the edge where I did the border has some fraying, and that's okay. Fraying is kind of a bummer, but I don't like throw away my brush pens when they start to fray. As long as they still feel okay and are flexible and are writing, I think they're still definitely okay to practice with. So page 6 is where the Karin Brushmarker Pro ended. The Tombow is definitely still putting out color for quite a while longer. Page 8 here is where I decided to test out that hand lettering with it. So to be honest, I don't feel like there's a clear winner here. Yes, one wrote for longer, but since I use these brush pens for hand lettering, it really is important to me which brush tip holds up longer. I feel like they were both super impressive and I would be happy to purchase either of these brush pens, but like I mentioned earlier, for curiosity's sake, I wanted to try the brush pens again by dipping them into liquid watercolor to see if those brush tips did still feel really usable or if I would just throw the pen away at this point. Now, this isn't an equal comparison because I did write with the Tombow brush pen a lot more. So that tip has had more time to wear down because I did use it for more pages than the Karin Marker. But this is just to see if there's something that I can use these pens for once they dry out. And to be honest, the Karin Brushmarker tip does not feel all that bad. I just feel like it's impressive because I know I've mentioned this before on Instagram, but with most of my brush pens, they fray and the tips get ruined before they even run out of ink. So far, the Sharpie Stained has been the only one I think that hasn't done that for me. Maybe the Pentel Touch, but I don't really use those as often. So the fact that this is still working pretty well does feel impressive to me. Now, it's not perfect and it's still worn down a bit, but you can see for yourself that I am still able to letter with it, and it does look pretty nice. So now I'm going to test out using my Tombow Dual Brush Pen again. I did break for dinner and had to charge my battery after doing the Tombow. So the filming after Tombow was actually done the next day. And I had a feeling that after sitting for a while, the Tombow was going to work again since it did have a chance to sit for a while and maybe let some more color flow down if there was any in there. But after testing it, it might have been a little bit better than when I ended the day before, but I still wouldn't really consider it usable. But when I dipped it into the liquid watercolor, I was really surprised that the tip felt a lot better. I always assumed that when the pen started to feel soft that it was being completely ruined, but I am now starting to wonder if part of that is just because of how it feels without the brush tip being saturated in that color. So when I test it here, it was really frayed, but it didn't feel that bad. In my opinion, the Karin felt less soft than the Tombow, but again, I wrote with the Tombow a lot more. Also, this is kind of a personal preference. Some people actually do prefer that softer brush tip, so that's not necessarily a bad thing. So a surprising turn after all of this testing is that I would recommend, if you have liquid watercolors, to test this method out when your brush pens are not feeling all that great anymore and see if it helps to extend their life a little bit more. I have actually been wanting to share a DIY liquid watercolor video for a long time now, so this has kind of motivated me to maybe get that one done sooner than later. So I think I will try to film that one really soon for you guys so that you have an option if you don't want to have to purchase anything. So definitely watch out for that video in the next couple of weeks. Overall, again, I don't think there's a clear winner to me. They both wrote for a really long time, they both filled up a lot of pages, and they both were usable when dipped in liquid watercolor. Now, they didn't feel awesome at the end, but when it comes to practicing, I would use either. So I hope that was fun to see. I would love to hear what you thought about those, which one you preferred, if you've tried this at home. If you have any other brush pens that you would like me to test against each other, let me know in the comments below or over on my Instagram. You can find me there at howtohandletter. You can also find lots of free lettering tutorials over on my blog at howtohandletter.com. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one.